We just want to welcome you. And if you're a frequent listener, thank you so much for coming back. We're always so grateful for everyone who listens, gives us feedbacks, and even topic suggestions as well.
Yeah, and we really hope that you enjoyed our last episode about Shiv's journey of getting married in a pandemic. And today we have another special guest who we will introduce to you shortly.
Yes, so as it is Mental Health Awareness Month, we thought that we would get an expert in to kick off this mental health series. So we want to introduce you to Abz very shortly.
Yes, but before she says hi, I just want to give you a little bit of background about Abz. Both Shiv and I grew up with her, and she was our guest for Girl Talk last year. But also, I used to be her youth leader. Mad.
Okay. And fun fact, Abz and I used to sing together at a little thing called Blueprint Youth. So shout out anyone from Blueprint Youth. And I was actually honoured, so honoured, to sing at Abz's wedding a few years ago. Yeah, real life thug tears right now. But yes, let us formally introduce Abz.
Hey! Hey! Gosh, that was such a good build up. I was getting excited.
There's so much we could say about you. But honestly, Abz, we're so glad that you are here. Let us know a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Okay, so obviously the reason that I'm on today for mental health is that I'm a psychotherapist. So I specialise in cognitive behavioural therapy, or CBT. And I mainly do that with 11 to 25-year-olds at a clinic in Oxford. But I also work in schools and stuff as part of my other job, which is youth pastor at Encounter Church, which is an Elim church in Birmingham. So I try and do mental health stuff and youth stuff all the time. So this is great.
Amazing. So Abz, thank you for letting us know a little bit about your background. I know that Shae and I are definitely in good hands today in terms of feeling looked after, our mental well-being. But Abz, before we get started, we always play a game with our guests. And we do this thing called This or That, which you're very familiar with. We would have done it before at Girl Talk. It might have been a bit controversial, but it is well. So we're gonna do a quick fire round.
Abz,
Shae, are you gonna try to preempt Abz's?
Abz. I'm just gonna let you know the last question matters, and don't say both. Just throwing that one out there.
We don't want to give her any clues. But so yeah, you know the deal. So we're gonna play a quick game of This or That. Are you ready, Abz?
Yeah, ready as I'll ever be.
Fantastic. Remember, it's quick fire, so please no hesitation, no okay? All right, you ready?
Uh-huh.
So first one is cooking or eating?
Eating.
iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Silver or gold?
Gold.
Comedy or rom-com?
Comedy.
African food or Caribbean food?
African food, love, sorry.
If only you could see my head right now. I shook my head.
It's okay. Theatre or cinema?
Ooh, theatre.
Well done.
Eating out or there's rice at home?
Eating out. I'm bad.
Hey, there's rice at home, sis.
Yeah, but restaurants though.
I know. Plantain or plantain?
Plantain. Why do you always ask me this question?
I'm trying to be controversial here.
Because you answer it wrong every single time.
I answer it the way.
Okay, next one. How do you like your steak?
Good question.
Oh, medium rare.
Okay, good. Trainers or heels?
Heels.
Reading a book or watching the film?
Reading a book.
What is your dream holiday destination?
I think Bali.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
Next one is cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Hey! I'm losing friends with every podcast, and every time I ask this question, I'm losing friends. Okay, we've got two more left. Are you messy or are you tidy?
I can't answer that one. I'm both.
It's like, I'm both. It's fine. There's no judgment. And last one, the most important one. The penultimate. No, not the penultimate. The one after the penultimate.
The ultimate.
Okay, are you ready? Shiv or Shae?
Siobhan.
Yeah. good
Round of
answer.
applause.
Good answer.
Woo. No, wait, it was wisdom. I think last time we had someone Josiah answered Jesus, right?
He said Jesus, yeah.
So it's cool. Anyways, Abs, that's great. And we're gonna get into today's episode. Like Shiv said, we want to touch on the topic of mental health.
And this topic has actually been highly requested by so many of our listeners, and we're aware that, you know, worldwide people are starting to, you know, tackle the importance of mental health, including, you know, myself and Shae as well. So before we do go on, Shae, I have a question. Have you had any recent encounters that made you consider, you know, your mental well-being, especially during lockdown?
Yeah, do you know what? I was actually thinking about this question as we was preparing for this episode, and actually I want to quickly go back before lockdown and just talk about two things really quickly. So definitely as a teenager I was depressed, but I didn't realise I was depressed until I started studying more about mental health, and I was like, I realised some of the triggers that I had and the signs of depression. But actually I remember one time, Shiv, and I don't know if you remember, I was at home and I had to go, I was getting ready for work, and I somehow lost my house keys in my house, which makes no sense. I couldn't find them and I was running late, and I got myself into this big whirlwind. And I remember, like, as that was happening, I felt like I was, for lack of a better word, I felt like I was losing my mind. I just wasn't in a good mindset. And I remember calling you, breaking down, and I think I was like, Shiv, I need help. But that was a big moment for me, because actually it was over something small, but me losing a key was a trigger, and it escalated to something bigger because of all the other things that was happening around me. And I realised at that moment, when I was upset, instead of doing something silly at that moment, I was like, let me call someone to get out of this, someone to talk positivity into me, or tell me actually it's going to be okay, so that I can be fine. And I think we prayed together, and then even as I walked to work, I was struggling because I needed to breathe and stuff like that. But actually that anxiety attack, that panic attack, or whatever it was that day, was quite big. And I think that's the biggest sort of mental health problem or issue that I've had, and that I really acknowledge. And I think throughout lockdown I've had ups and downs, but I've made sure that I've spoken to people just to keep on the positive. I don't know if that makes any sense, but what about you, Shiv? Like, what is your experience with mental health?
Do you know what? You bringing that up now, I actually remember the exact moment, and I remember being in the office, and I remember you coming in and us talking. So that some of these memories, they just never leave. So thanks for sharing. And for me, like I shared in our previous podcast, in lockdown especially, mine was dealing with, you know, panic attacks and anxiety attacks, and I realized that they were happening more frequently. And for me, I saw it as a sort of result of, you know, stress with the wedding, you know, going through a lot of change, because obviously I was someone who was living at my house for, you know, 27 years, and now getting ready to move out and, you know, be married, you know, living with this man, and a whole changing environment, but also, like, you know, not having any control in the wedding and stuff. So for me, I realized that when I was going through a panic attack, obviously at the time I just thought like, oh, I just feel a little bit unwell. Sometimes I feel really like emotional. Other times my chest is really tight and I can't breathe properly. I remember one time that I shared last time, like I was in the car and I was at the traffic lights, and suddenly I just felt just like an overwhelming sense of just, you know, like sadness, like crying in my car while I was trying to drive. And then recognizing, okay, I'm having a panic attack. Whereas before, I just thought it was like, I'm just really down, I'm really low, like this is, you know, life is just tough or whatever. So for me, it was, you know, the anxiety attacks, but then through like talking to people, you know, letting people know, okay, I had a panic attack today, so they could, you know, just stop and pray, recognizing what my triggers were. And I remember very significantly, you know, speaking to someone who also works with within like sort of like CBT, and she basically said, you know, like anxiety is just a normal thing. Like everybody, we're human at the end of the day, so we will have, you know, feelings of, you know, being anxious, because it's just a human emotion that we have to deal with, but it's about managing them and recognizing your triggers. And I then got to a place where, okay, I know what my triggers are now. My triggers are, change, feeling stressed, feeling like hopeless, or things are like not in my control, and recognizing them and being able to sort of like counteract them. So that was my experience. And Abz, I'd love to hear from you. Do you have any experience at all? Someone who is like someone who works in the mental health profession. Have you had any sort of encounters yourself?
Yeah, so I'd say it's really interesting actually hearing from you, like Shae, when you said, for example, you were a teenager and you experienced depression, but you didn't know what it was. And I think for me, I realised that I had difficulties with my mental health when I started studying psychology. So often people, like the young people that I work with, they want to get more involved in mental health because they know that they've experienced negative things in their mental health. But I actually had no idea that I had, that I felt very anxious just the whole way through sixth form, and that I would like pick up loads of things to do sort of as a way of distracting myself. And it's a mechanism that I know that I have now, and that I can sort of catch myself out in. And I'd say lockdown, when it started last year, that's when I really noticed how much easier, well, I put easier in quotes, but you can't see me, how much easier I found it to just bury myself in stuff to do, rather than really notice that I felt trapped at home. So I would volunteer myself for everything, for online church, for youth. I'd put out all these different things for the young people to do. They didn't have time to do all that stuff. I was just planning and trying to overcompensate, I think, for the fact that I felt a bit helpless, like obviously with the uncertainty of how long we're going to be in lockdown for, and life changed so much so fast. And one of my like unhelpful coping mechanisms, you could say, is like I just bury myself in stuff to do. And it's when I start to get like physically drained from that I notice that, I'm not coping very well. Actually, I'm quite overwhelmed, and I have to dial right back. So definitely over lockdown, I've been through many phases where I feel like I've clocked it, I know what I'm doing, I'm fine, and then something else will happen, or I'll notice something else, I'll be like, actually, maybe that's not so helpful. So it's definitely been a really, illuminating part of my journey with my own mental health, for sure. And as part of that, in September, I started seeing a therapist myself, which has been really interesting. And obviously, as a therapist, I recommend therapy, but as someone who has been experiencing it, I doubly do, I guess.
Sometimes like where people say like, oh, like you're good at giving advice, but you can't take your own advice.
Yeah.
Like, do you find that because I know you just recommend like as a therapist getting a therapist, but do you take your own advice sometimes, like the stuff that you're sharing to like your like patients or your clients and stuff? Do you find yourself being able to do that?
Yeah, so that's a great question, to be honest, because I had a supervisor when I was training who really lived by, do not tell anyone to try any technique that you haven't tried yourself.
Oh wow.
And so I really try and do that as much as possible. I'll be like reading up about, it's really good, for example, to take a really hot bath at night if you're struggling with sleep, because if you have a routine of having like a hot bath or shower, then your pulse slows down and you're able to like gradually, like your temperature goes down as you're falling asleep, which is really natural and it helps. I have always been a morning shower person, so as I was trying to help people with sleep, I realized that a suggestion that I always make is this bath shower thing, and it wasn't something that I'd ever done, and I struggle with sleep, so I was like, massive hypocrite. Okay, let's do this. And honestly, from the moment I decided to start doing it, that's my routine now. I have like bubble baths at night, like I feel proper self-care on overload, but it's really helpful. So I really do try and do the things that I'm suggesting, but often it is as I'm speaking to someone, I hear a problem and I'm like, it's really clear to me what could be helpful for you, but I feel like I have this problem too, and I've never thought of it this way before. So yeah. It's great,
No, that's
to be
fair.
honest.
Thank you for sharing. So we've looked at triggers and situations, like our own sort of like lifestyle habits as well, that can increase the chances of us encountering struggles in our mental health. But Abz, is there anything that we can do to improve or protect our mental health? Is there anything that you want to say about that?
Yeah, so I've already mentioned what I'd say is kind of one of the strongest predictors of our mental health, and it's sleep. I have never come across anyone that experiences like depression or anxiety and doesn't have problems with sleep, which indicates that the other way around is also helpful. If you can protect the time when you relax and when you sleep well, then that's a really good foundation for your mental health. So having a good routine of when you wake up, when you go to sleep, it's really containing and comforting. And I think the best way for me to explain this in general is if you think about like a toddler. So when you want to look after a child, you try and make sure that they have a good routine, that they know when they're going to wake up, when they sleep, when they eat, what foods they're allowed at different times. You try and get them to see and play with other children at times. You try and make sure that they have time, that they're focused on their learning. But often with ourselves, we're a lot more like, okay, I'll just do that if I have time. And we can be quite reactive to our environment. And it's so much more comforting for us as individuals if we can anticipate at least some of the rhythm of our day to day. Obviously, we can't control life and things come up and we have to respond to them accordingly. But we can even do that a lot better when we can say, this is different from normal. I'm going to adjust in these ways, but normally I would get to do this. So I need to also plan when I'm still going to do that so that you're still looking after yourself. So I'd say that's a really important part of having a positive attitude towards your mental health as well. And I say that, like I've already said, my default can be to like overwork, which if you think about it isn't a very compassionate way of treating yourself. Like you wouldn't ask someone else to overwork. You would ask them to do what they can and leave the rest. And so I try increasingly to have this attitude towards myself as well and be realistic about what it is I'm going to be able to do and plan to do that and not plan to do like 100%, even though I've only really got the energy for 70. And so just having that attitude that I'm going to plan to do the things that I need to do, but I'm also going to plan to recover from them as well. And having that all in your routine is really supportive.
That's good. You know, you mentioned sleep, and my husband Dwayne, he was reading this book sort of at the beginning of lockdown last year by Matthew Walker, and it's called Why We Sleep. And he was someone who like, you know, went around, and if anyone said, you know, like, oh yeah, you know, like I'm, you know, working, you know, like sleep is from the enemy and all that. Dwayne was like, no, actually sleep is so crucial. Like if without sleep you can't function properly, or, you know, your body doesn't have time to recover, and actually, you know, it's more damaging when we don't sleep. And I think I found especially if someone says, you know, like I'm struggling to sleep, that is like a good indicator of like poor mental health as well. So like my own experience, when I was, you know, waking up 3 or 4 times in a night, and this was like when I sort of first got married, because I was adjusting to just, you know, again change. I recognized, and I think I remember speaking to you about it, Abz, on one of our catch-ups about like how I was struggling to sleep and stuff. And I think it did tie down to you know, the trigger being change, new environment, you know, new smells, new routine, that kind of thing. So in experiencing that, it kind of helped me with other people, and they say like, oh, I'm not really sleeping, but it's fine. Well, actually no, that's something that needs to be addressed, because if not, you know, everything is affected. I guess
100%.
You know, what would you say that like lack of sleep, how it can, you know, affect people in other ways, apart from, you know, being extremely tired?
There's that.
Are there other ways that it affects people?
Definitely. So sleep has like 5 main stages, and I won't go into them in detail, but stage 3 is called restorative sleep. And it's what really brings you back to yourself, is the best way I can describe it. So throughout the day, you're like learning things, you're using your body, your cells are getting tired, some cells are dying, and you're needing to build new ones, usually overnight. And in stage 3, that's when your body can do that best. However, you don't hit stage 3 sleep in the first hour and a half of being asleep. You're just going through like different cycles. So, and you need stage 3 sleep to happen at least twice in a night, really. But if you don't sleep enough, or if your sleep won't go deep enough, then you don't get that really important part of sleep, which means that your body's kind of carrying over work from one day to another. So it's hard on your memory, it's hard on your concentration, it's harder for you to notice what's going on around you socially as well, because you build on the cues that you had the day before. So if you've not fully absorbed everything that happened, then you're kind of behind in your communication with like your loved ones and stuff as well. So it's a really, really important foundation for our day to day. Like sleep is just as important as water, really, when we think about our survival. Because if you're, I always say like the best way to torture someone is to keep them awake. It's actually better than all the others. And so this has been done. When people aren't able to sleep fully, then they automatically take what we call micro sleeps, and they kind of sleep for like 30 seconds when they blink. And so people, when they're being tortured, sometimes they will stop them from being able to take that micro sleep. And if that happens for 3 days, you die. Whereas you can go without water for longer than that. So that gives you an idea of just how much sleep is doing in terms of our ability to function and thrive, actually.
Wow. I'm actually so shocked. I've always known sleep was important, but I've just learned how important it is. And it's funny because actually growing up, and Shiv, you touched on this earlier, growing up, there was a mindset of we grind hard and we don't sleep. The early bird catches the worm and stuff like that. And I lived by that at one point. And honestly, I could run for a period of time off a few hours of sleep every day. However, I would always crash, or I would compensate sleep. Like I would nap. I love naps. Oh, I do love a good Sunday nap. But sorry. I used, actually, let's talk about Sunday naps quickly, yeah, and then I'll go back to my point. When working for the church, in between second service and 5 p.m. evening service, that 20 minutes nap, whether it be in my house, whether it be at church, that refreshed me. But I needed it, and I actually started to build it into my Sunday routine. Otherwise, by the time I came to evening service, and obviously as a minister, we had to talk to people and stuff like that, I was ready and prepared to speak to people. When I missed that nap, or when I missed that alone time, I struggled with connecting with people as a result of being tired. But what I was saying, sorry, I went off topic, but, when I was younger and I was on this mindset of grind hard, don't sleep, and I'll crash, or the other things, and I know a lot of people in sort of the urban setting do this, they use things to compensate sleep. So they could be tired and they may smoke weed, or to chill and calm down, or drink alcohol and stuff like that. I've noticed, especially within the hood, I've been speaking to a lot of my friends who are struggling from PTSD, and because they're upset, because they're depressed, because they have this condition because of what they've seen, they're now they're having a coping mechanism such as weed and alcohol, but actually they're not dealing with it, they're just adding to it. And actually, Abz, maybe you can touch on that, like the effects of having coping mechanisms. I know you touched on you with working hard and stuff, but how does that affect our mental health? How do we come out of that cycle, maybe?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one. You mentioned weed, and I can't ignore it. Basically, a lot of people, especially if you're struggling with sleep, it's a really common thing that people will either drink or like smoke weed to try and get, because you get into a relaxed place and you can fall asleep better. But the actual quality of the sleep, if you imagine the impact that these things have on your brain, all the processes that your brain needs to do when it's asleep can't work in that way when it's under the influence of any substance. And that includes like caffeine and nicotine, like the different things that we take in. Obviously, we've taken them in for a reason. They're going to do something to how our brain is processing different chemicals and things like that. So the effect continues when we're asleep. And so it can be really helpful to try and remind people of actually what it is that your brain is doing when you're like taking a substance or anything like that. And usually what is happening is that it's blocking messages from being sent so that you don't get anxious, so that you don't remember something or whatever, which means those same processes that it's going to be trying to build in your sleep are also being affected. And so with the different mechanisms that we have, in therapy, I often do a functional analysis with people, and that's basically to work out what the intended purpose of their action is and what some of the consequences might be, planned or unplanned. And you can try and work out from that how much you want to rely on a behavior. And that's not to say you'll never rely on that behavior, because actually it's usually the simpler one to do, even if it's not the best overall. And you can't always pick the harder option. It's just an unrealistic thing to ask of people, but you can be more aware of which option you're picking and how frequently you want to choose that one. So I say the same with like me and having coffee in the morning. I love coffee. I know when it's decaf. I prefer caffeine. Let's just have it straight. But if I have like more than one coffee in a day, or if I have a coffee after 12, I know that I take longer to get sleepy in the evening. Fact, like I can argue it however which way I want, but I know what is most useful to my body. That doesn't mean that if I'm flagging at 2 I never have a coffee. That's a lie. I definitely do. But I have to calculate, okay, if I do this, I'm probably going to need to not watch TV in the evening, because it will make it even harder for me to fall asleep later. And just like understand what it is that you're asking your body to do when you're making all these different decisions.
That's so good. Wow.
Hey, getting all these little nuggets of wisdom. It's like a free therapy session that we're getting today, and our listeners are getting a free session. I love it. Based on what you've said, I wanted to ask like something general that we can all relate to right now. As we're coming out of lockdown and restrictions are being eased, how can we, other people, friends and family, how can we prioritize like good mental health? That could be like physically, emotionally. Like I know a lot of people have made some changes in their lifestyle during the lockdown. A lot of people have been working from home who've now been told to come back into the office, or some people have been doing like weekly walks. Like I do a weekly walk with one of my friends, and it's been great. Like we've gone through every season, literally every season. We've had snow, we've had hailstone, we've had wind, we've had really hot weather, and it's been great. We've just walked for 2 hours and talked, and it's been fantastic. But like how can we get people to prioritize good mental health as we're stepping out of lockdown?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think this is something I'm thinking about constantly for myself, because like I've possibly mentioned a few times now, I have a tendency to overplan. And one of the really tempting things to do, like, things are opening up. Let's see this friend, let's go to that city, let's have these people over, let's blah, blah, blah. And forget the impact on your bank account. Actually, we've not been doing that for ages. So we're not used to it. And so like the biggest like flag I have in my head is like I need to be graded in my approach to the things that I do. And I'll just explain what I mean. We kind of have this process in CBT that we grade everything, and that's to say you try a little bit first, and then you do a bit more, and then you do a bit more, and gradually your body builds up to the level that you can do more and more. And you get that with like exercise, for example. At first you can't lift much, but if you keep going it increases. And it's similar with all the things we're trying to build in. like Shiv, when you mentioned the really drastic change from being single and out in your family home to being married and in your new home with Dwayne, like it's a good change, but the fact that so much changed at once made it harder to cope with. And I think we also need to look at, okay, what was my life like in April, and what am I asking about? What am I asking of myself for June? And is that a fair leap to go from? Actually, it might be helpful to keep my mental health walk, because it's maybe something that's grounding me where I am, even though it might be harder to plan around with all the other demands that are going to be on my time. And on a similar vein in that, like, many people, you guys will know this about me because you grew up with me, but many people don't know that I'm quite introverted. Like, I do struggle to be with people all the time. And I struggle sometimes to like speak up. Like, at first, when I start a conversation, my voice can be really quiet. And then I have to like build up to it. And so going back into like massively social situations is something that actually I found really scary when they were first talking about it, when they released the like roadmap to coming out of COVID. I'm like so excited to see people and to, you know, get to see my family again and go to people's birthdays like in real life. But at the same time, I was like gripped by fear with it. And I had to remind myself, and like as I was reminding other people, like patients, it helped to remind me as well that I don't have to do everything all at once. And it's actually probably not wise to do that. But I started by doing something like going into the office once a week. And at first that was scary, like driving to Oxford and stuff. But then once I got there and I'd been there for half a day, I was like, oh yeah, this is my job. I know how to do this. And it sounds so simple, but I can imagine that there might be some people listening and there's stuff coming up, like maybe, 60th birthday parties or whatever. And it's like, that's great, but I don't really know how to do that anymore. And that's okay. Like, we're all in a very similar boat, but it will look different for us. So just be aware of what it is that you're worried about and maybe break it down, so you don't have to do everything at once.
That's really good.
Amazing.
That is really good what you shared. Like as you're speaking, like stuff just kind of keeps coming to mind, like whether it's like my own situation or just thinking about like the people that we work with, because we all work with young people in some way or form. And like Abz, this is probably like my final question before I touch on the ones that have been sent in. But with the whole pandemic and just a great year of change for everyone, being stuck at home and actually like losing family members and jobs, that kind of stuff. Like I would say that we've all been through like some form of trauma. I don't know if you agree, whether it's like severe or quite like minor, something that's quite traumatic. But in terms of everyone who's dealt with trauma, do you have any like tips on like not what they can do, but maybe someone who recognizes, okay, I think my friend is going through trauma here, how can I support them? Like what do you do in sort of like your field of work with those who are dealing with trauma?
Yeah, that's a great question. Trauma work is actually fascinating to me because we all process trauma in very different ways, but the patterns are very similar. And it generally is a feeling of being unsafe, even when you are safe. It's just this constant feeling of being unsafe and on edge. And so the first thing we always start with is a process called stabilization, and that's feeling safe in your environments again. So for some people, that is having smells around that are really comforting and remind them that they're safe. So, and what those smells are, depending on who you are, will be different. Like for me, I really like lavender, and it reminds me of peace.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, and it's an essential oil that people often use for soothing, and I really like it. I put it in my bath and everything.
Me too.
But some people, like, it might be like, the bubblegum smell. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just having things that remind you that you're safe. And you really can use all of your senses for that. So I've mentioned smell. Some people like having like peppermints quite a lot because it's a really strong taste and it can bring them back to themselves, like when they're feeling overwhelmed. Or like having like blankets and cups of tea around quite a lot, things that make you feel comfortable and cozy. It's all about feeling safe. And I go back to the toddler because actually sometimes, and I'm speaking particularly to men here, we can feel like we shouldn't be like getting cozy or whatever, you know, there's stuff to do, there's things to get on with and things like that. But if you think about a child, they have so much energy, they're learning so much all the time. The demands we have as a toddler, learning to walk and talk and interact and stuff, there's a lot going on. So they nap a lot. And we make them comfortable and we make them feel safe. And we're the same person we were when we were 3 years old, and we need all the same things. Wow. So it's important to look at what you have around you and work out where you can be safe, where you can breathe more deeply and like unwind properly so that you can get back up and keep doing stuff.
Amazing. Wow.
I'm here like taking notes of everything that you're saying. But thank you for sharing, Abz. So we've had like 2 questions that have been sent in that people wanted to ask you, and I wondered if you could, you know, spend a few minutes, you know, touching on them. The first one is, what I did is I just kind of threw it out there, like, what does mental health mean to you? And one person literally said illness. And I didn't like rebuke them for saying that. I just wanted to hear the first thing, you know, without prompting, what comes to your mind. And the word illness came up. So I wanted to know, like, why is there still like so much stigma, you know, behind mental health, and, you know, why is it considered an illness to some people and in some cultures?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. This comes up for me all the time. It even came up earlier this week. And I think the main reason that there's stigma around mental health is fear. So like illness actually is very scary. Like, we're humans, we realize how fragile we are, and the idea of being unwell is scary. So I think with our mental health, even though I always say our mental health and our physical health are not only very linked, but they're very similar in how they work. And in the same way, if I have a bit of a cold or I feel run down, I might go to the doctor, I might just get some paracetamol. Our mental health is very similar. Sometimes we're not just feeling tired, but we're feeling fatigued. We're feeling quite anxious. And actually, we now need to look after our mental health as opposed to just maintain it. And when we're talking about mental health, often people might avoid talking about the things that they're doing to look after themselves as ways of looking after their mental health, because they worry that it suggests that there's more of a problem than there is. But anxiety is perfectly normal. We all know what it is. We all know what it feels like. And so whether you're experiencing that constantly and as like a day-to-day and it's becoming really overwhelming, or whether you only felt it before a presentation, it's the same thing. So speaking about it as something severe or really scary actually just doesn't make very much sense, because it's something that is actually really common and familiar. But mental illnesses, like when people's mental health, I'd say, is when someone has a diagnosable mental health disorder, are also considered more scary. And that's generally because we don't understand them as well. Like in our day-to-day, we are taught quite a lot about our bodies, even in biology and stuff, and we're taught about different types of disorders and things, but we're not really taught that much about mental health disorders and how they affect people, unless you specifically studied psychology. So that question mark can make it really difficult to even kind of get our heads around and understand. And then the way that different mental illnesses such as psychosis or having like bipolar disorder and things like that, the way that they're spoken about in media is so negative that it's really difficult to see the whole picture and to remember that a person experiencing those things is still a person. Sometimes we can like recategorize people like without even noticing that that's what we're doing.
Of course.
And to that, I'd say it can be really helpful to just read about different types of mental illnesses on websites like Mind, because they can give quite a good explanation of what's going on for that person and help us to respond with empathy rather than fear, really. And I'd say that's the main barrier that prevents us from speaking about mental health is fear.
I agree with that so much. Thank you for sharing. It's quite interesting because actually what you said firstly about your physical health and mental health being connected. So I play football and at first it was just a hobby, but actually during lockdown and just being physically active football was the most consistent thing that I had, whether it be me kicking by myself or me with my team. And actually now that football's back, that's the one thing I prioritise throughout the week. Like, no one's stopping me from going football because it's one, it's routine, but two, it gives me an opportunity just to run and burn off whatever I'm thinking and feeling. But when I don't play football, I notice there's a dip in my mental health.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't feel as good as I normally do. And that's simply because I'm now trying to be more aware between my physical and mental health. And what you said about anxiety, obviously, like Shiv touched on, we all work with young people.
Yeah.
And I found, I don't know if it's lockdown. I'm assuming it's lockdown because we won't really understand the effect of this pandemic until a few years. But I found a lot more young people are suffering with anxiety, and we've spent time at my workplace. Like right now, we're doing art, but it's become really therapeutic because our young people are focusing on one thing, and that they've all shared actually this is really nice and we've really enjoyed it because they're focusing on one thing and they can forget about their problems. But with that, we've also included stuff where they begin to talk about their feelings, because I found that actually people they're not as good as opening up with how they feel because, like you said, the worry, the fear, the stigma around it. And one of the things we try to create at my workplace is actually this is a safe space and you should be able to speak about it, at least write it out, because you can't keep holding everything in. That's where I found things get worse, so you need that release. So yeah, thank you for sharing. I'm really taking in what you're saying because I think it's important. Like, I'm connecting the dots to some of my thought processes, and actually this is beneficial. We need to prioritise our mental health, especially as people. All of us work with people. If we're not in a good mental place, that has a trickling effect with the people that we serve and stuff like that. So yeah. But anyways, I've got a question. This is a question that someone sent in, is how can we help someone who you believe has poor mental health?
This is a question that I've had from some young people have like messaged me and stuff about a friend, this is happening, not sure what to do and all this stuff. And like, first off, recognizing that there's someone who might be struggling with their mental health is really important. We, as Christians, we know and feel like we do have a responsibility for the people around us as well. And to not take that on too much, but to just notice and respond like where you can is really important. And the main things, obviously, that I guess you're looking out for, I mean, Shiv, you mentioned about people's sleep. Eating can be a really helpful one as well. If you're noticing that maybe someone isn't speaking about things in the way that they used to or responding as quickly as they used to. I mean, with responding, guys, I'm bad at it in general. But if you know what someone's baseline normally looks like and it's looking off, there might be some things that maybe you're questioning in your head, but we can have this barrier of sometimes like we don't want to be sounding too nosy or we don't want to bother someone or whatever. So if you think about you, like what it is that would help you if you were struggling with anything, usually it's knowing that other people care, like whether or not they have the answers, whether or not they can actually do anything physically, the fact that they care about you and love you, and the reminder of that is so important. So I'd say, showing that you are willing to make time for someone is really important. Like, and I give the example, if I ask, how are you? You're likely to say, yeah, I'm fine, and we can move on. And so sometimes I ask again, yeah, but how are you really? Like, what's going on? Just so that they know that I mean it and that there's time if they want it, rather than it was just the preamble to what I actually want to talk to you about. So that can be helpful, as well as like, you know, offering a phone call, or now we can like meet for coffee or whatever, but offering your time just reminds people that actually you do care about them, and it can help them to open up to you about what they might really need. Shae, you've mentioned that obviously like speaking and talking about the things that you're experiencing is helpful for you, and many people have a massive barrier to doing that anyway. So like kind of like how you spoke about with the young people and writing stuff down or something, I like to encourage people, like, even if you don't want to talk to me about it, maybe write it down for yourself, and then you can let me know later if you want. Just like maybe if I've asked you something and I think maybe you're like shrinking back or you're closing up about it, I might say, oh, it's okay. Well, if you let me know anything, I can pray for anyway. But if you want to talk to me about it at another time, like, I'm still here. Because, you know, sometimes in that moment, people are like, I can't say anything. But if you leave them with another in, then they might come back to you later. So, yeah, that can be helpful as well. But lastly, I think a really important one is demonstrating that actually you don't carry stigmas about mental health, or if you do, trying to check them as much as possible. So being open about how it is that you're feeling as much as you can, so that people know that you're someone they can talk to about how they're feeling, and kind of modeling that openness. But also, you know, like if I give an example of someone who I think has been possibly feeling quite low, maybe depressed, and I'm like, I don't know, are you just tired, or do you feel like you really just can't do it? Do you know what I mean? And just sometimes bringing the conversation there, so they could be like, no, it's not that, or they could be like, actually, that is more what I mean when I say that I'm tired or I can't do it today. And it just gives people the opportunity to be real if they wanted to be.
No, I was gonna say, I really love that, and I think just to throw back this one last point with writing things down with my young people. I talk about my young people all the time. This is where I'm at. But what we've done as well, we wrote things down, and then we went outside and we burnt how they were feeling. But that also gave us opportunities, because I read what was personal to them because they couldn't speak it out. But it gave us opportunities, like you said, to begin to speak about certain things afterwards. With one of my young people, there's 4 questions that I ask her to answer every single day, because I see them quite often, and she's gotten used to that journeying process, and she's shared that she feels a lot better. And it's just that it's being a safe base for people, but then on the flip side, if you're supporting someone, making sure that you have that outlet as well. So I know that, like, with work, there were times where I'm like, Shiv, can you pray for this? This is how I'm feeling, because I know that as a Christian I can't take everything on myself, and I'm fortunate to know God. I'm fortunate to know that I can go to him with everything, but not everyone knows God, and not everyone's comfortable with that. So having that safe space. But yeah, Abz, honestly, just thank you for all that you've shared. Like I said earlier, there's so many gems in this podcast, and I can't wait to listen to it back and think, this is how I'm gonna support, or this is how I'm gonna better my mental health. And I feel like every time you speak, Abz, I learn something new. So thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, it's my pleasure, honestly.
You know, Shae, you touched on just a second ago, like, you know, us, we are, you know, believers, and we believe that, you know, Jesus can heal our physical bodies, you know, our mental, you know, selves as well. And, you know, a scripture that came to my mind was 1 Peter 5 verse 7, which says, cast all your anxiety onto him because he cares for you. And, you know, for anyone who's listening who may not have a relationship with God, you know, that's fine, that you can still pray, use that as an outlet to just, you know, get any frustration just out into the open. Sometimes like speaking it or writing it down is a huge relief. And then another scripture that came to mind was Philippians 4 verse 6-7, which says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all our understanding, will guard your heart and your minds in Christ." With that being said, Abz, we always ask our speaker to close in prayer, just to, say a prayer over our listeners. Could you, pray for those who may be in their own mental health crisis or even struggling with their mental health?
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to. So, Father God, I thank you, Lord, for the opportunity to talk about our mental health. Our whole being is precious to you, Lord, and you care about what we're going through. You care about our physical and our mental health. And Lord, I pray that just maybe any of the things that have been triggered or prompted by listening to the podcast and in the listeners, I just pray, Lord, that you would draw near to them, Lord, that you would help people to seek help if they're struggling, to speak more openly and freely with the people who love and care about them. And Lord, that you would help us all to remember to love ourselves, to remember that you love us, that we are precious to you, and you ask us to love our neighbours as we love ourselves. And so, Lord, that's a really important part of how we can thank you for this life, is to look after ourselves. And I pray that you would be helping us to do that you would help us to speak to ourselves the way that you see us and speak to us, and to move forward as we come out of this pandemic in healthier ways. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much once again. And I know I keep saying thank you, but this has been so useful. I was just wondering, just before we close this off, actually, if there's someone, Shiv and I spoke, or we all spoke about, we had people to speak to, but if someone doesn't have someone to speak to, or if someone wants to find out more about different mental health illnesses or whatever, what are some of the sites they can go on to, or people they can call? I think we'll add this into our show notes as well.
So one of the sites I mentioned is mind.org.uk, and then there's Samaritans as well. Samaritans is a helpline that is a really helpful one for people when they're struggling in that moment, and that's 116123 to call them, and they can speak to you about anything really, but predominantly mental health. And I'd also recommend any wherever you are based, you'll have an IAPT service in your area. So IAPT is Improving Access to Psychological Therapies, and they're basically the NHS portal to getting therapy. But on their websites, so if you search your area and you search IAPT in different places, it's called different things basically. But it will come up, and on their websites, they always have lots of information about different types of therapies, different types of mental health disorders, and also like different resources that you can use for yourself as well.
That's so helpful. Thank you for sharing those websites and those resources, and we'll add them into the description so that people can check them out as well. So guys, that is us for today. If you have enjoyed today's episode and you've joined us on YouTube, we love to premiere live. If you're here live right now, give us a thumbs up, but most importantly, be sure to share this podcast. It doesn't matter if you're listening on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever. Be sure to share it with someone, because you never know, who it may impact, or there might be someone out there that who this can relate to, and it can provide them with a wealth of wisdom. I know for a fact that Shae and I have definitely learned a lot today. With that being said, please send in any questions, any other topic suggestions to our Insta. We are at Shiv and Shae Podcast. Thank you again, Abz. And this is where we do our closing bit, and we all say bye in unison. So thank you for listening. This is the Shiv and Shae Podcast. Out. Bye.
Bye.